Good evening, everybody. My name is Trevor Hancock, and I'd like to welcome you this evening. As someone who's been deeply embroiled in organising this for the last couple of months, it is such a relief to see you all here. You sort of put the word out and then you just hope that someone's going to come. And you all did, which is wonderful. Thank you. I'm not going to do introductions. I just want to repeat the announcement that is on the doors, just so you're fully aware of it. And that is that this event is being recorded and live streamed. Your attendance implies your permission to potentially appear on video. If you don't want to be seen, please sit towards the back of the audience. The camera is over there with Stephen, so if you want to keep out of sight of the camera, stay away from Stephen. Stay out of his line of sight. So I'm going to turn this over to Department of Bioregion from University of Victoria and from UVIC in Christine, who will introduce Elder.
Thanks, Trevor. So nice to see you all. So my name is Tamara Kochenko, and I'm part of this group at UVIC. We're concerned UVIC in the Anthropocene. Trevor started it with some other members. Tom there is involved with the back. Katja over here. If you're interested in joining us sometime, Google it. We'd love to see you. It is an absolute honor to introduce Elder Edie Pelkey of Sauk Nation, and her connections span across this territory, the Chalmette and Coast Salish territories. We've been hearing, had a chance to meet and hear about her incredible lineage, her father, who is a colossal leader, and she is a leader in her own right in her community. And we also are joined by Jesse, her grandson, today. So nice to see you both. Elder, I'm going to have you come up to the stage now. Elder Edie is going to bring us into and starting us off in a good way with a welcome to the territory. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I came in the Chilata. I have on the title, escape with the attainment. The slaves, the churches, and the queen of the high square of the square of the attainment. I was changed to 8 women because the Congress, the Nathan, and Sainage for the criminal. The slaves, the churches, and the queen of the square of the attainment. I just taking this opportunity to welcome you all here this evening. And it's really great to feel the positive energy here this evening. We're all here for a good cause and playing our part in preserving what we have here. And it's really amazing when you put out the information and don't know, who's going to show up. So this is really amazing, and I'm thanking you all for your participation.
several years, as many of you know, and I suspect is why many of you are here, to start up a conversation across this region about what it means to be a organic region. And what sort of future do we want for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, for the generations yet to come? Because right now we're not on a good path. And we need to be on a much better path, and it's going to take everybody involved, first of all, in discussing what are the challenges we face and where we need to go. So that's the process we are going to be embarking on anew. We kind of took a break during COVID because the online process wasn't working. Starting in the new year, we're starting a process of participatory futures that we want to engage people from all over the region in lots of different ways, in lots of different places, in that conversation, using lots of different techniques. So stay tuned. That is yet to come. Also, I want to recognize the funders of this. So we have been able to put this together, and also the initial work that we'll be doing on the participatory futures because of a grant from the Victoria Foundation from its new Sparks Fund, and we're very grateful for that, and also for the financial assistance of the Spanish Legacy Foundation. So I'd like to thank both of those funders, and particularly the Victoria Foundation, as the principal funder of this evening. And that's what I'm going to say. I'd like to invite Claire up and Brandon, I guess, or it was both Claire and Brandon, to say a few words from Regenerate Cascadia, which is the third partner in this process, working with Joe on the tour that he's undertaking around Cascadia.
So, I think it's important to just give some context of how this started. So there were conversations between, in Victoria with conversations, and then earlier this year, Brandon and I were part of the Edge Prize, which was Cascadia-wide, and recognized the opportunity to basically use the activation tours that Joe had been taking, Joe and the design school, Joe and Penny, and the Benji Ross, who's not here, part of the design school for Regenerate Earth, had been taken to the Great Lakes in Ontario and on the eastern seaboard, and in the Colorado River. And anyway, we realized that there was a way of being able to bioregionally take this conversation to a much broader audience. So I think Brandon.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting question and challenge for us. And it's really, how do we regenerate the Cascadia bioregion? Cascadia is just our home. The region is defined through the Fraser and Columbia rivers. And together, all of these rivers flowing helps really give the shape and character, also the frameworks that we need to be working on. So we wanted to use this question as our design challenge, which is how do we regenerate Cascadia? But more than that, how do we regenerate Victoria? How do we regenerate the Spanish Peninsula? And by traveling in different communities, we basically thought of this idea of an activation tour. And so over the last 30 days, we've been traveling around to, in total, we'll be going to 14 different communities to have this conversation. We're connecting with different regenerative projects and communities in each area and learning lessons. And I think what's amazing, and even just from the brief glimpse that I've gotten here, is that Victoria and this area seems to be so far ahead of implementing regional frameworks and having conversations. So then our challenge really becomes, how do we take those lessons and start to talk about sharing across landscapes, sharing across watersheds? Because what we're learning in one area probably is important for other areas too. And so when we connected with Joe Brewer and Penny and Benji earlier this year, we started kind of planning these conversations in April. And it was just amazing because it's also not just about here in Cascadia. It's about how do we regenerate so they're here watching what we're doing, and they're now wanting to do their own activation tools. They're wanting to do their own bioregion suns. And so our job, as we're going around, is to document these lessons and make them templates, and make them replicable. And then we can really start to have a conversation. So some of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I know in the interest of time, I think that Joe will fill in a lot more.
Thanks.
So we're going to test out the lighting so that you can see the slides better. That looks good. And let me just put this on here so that I cannot stand still, because I don't like to stand still. There we go. So hi everyone, can you hear me okay? So my name is Joe Brewer, and I'm originally from Missouri, but I have lived in the Cascadia bioregion for about a third of my life. Spent 9 years living in Seattle, about 5 years living in Eugene. And so this is a region that I know and love very much. And it's also a place that during the time that I did live here, I felt this emptiness in my heart because I wanted to give to this region the love that I was feeling by being connected to this place. But for various reasons, the universe had a sense of humor, and I wasn't really able to bring my gifts. And so in the ironies of the universe, it wasn't until 4 years after I moved to another continent, because now my family lives in Barichara, Colombia, in South America, that I started to have this feeling emerge again that I should come back to these places that I love and help people connect themselves to their place. And so what I want to share with you tonight is the type of conversation that humanity absolutely needs to have. The kind of conversation that opens up a pathway into the future for young people to believe that it's actually worth getting married and having children, and that extinction will not happen during their lifetimes. One of the things that's happened on this journey in the last few weeks is we've met a lot of young people. And a lot of young people are feeling crushing anxiety about the future. And so there's a real need for a pathway that does not shy away from the truth of our predicament, and yet at the same time offers something holistic and complete enough to believe that it's worth trying. Because what most of our environmental discourse tells us is that the solution is to change your light bulbs, to buy an electric car, or to make some other kind of consumer purchase within the economy as it is. And young people can see right through that. And so they're looking for leadership. They're looking for support. They're looking for their own heart's calling to lead into the future that is a scary and dangerous place. The other thing that we've seen as we've been traveling is a lot of older people, a lot of gray hairs. Some of you may be in this room. People who feel a sense of broken legacy, who may feel ashamed about the planet that they're leaving behind in the later part of their lives, or people who are living in a place of privilege and responsibility, possibly as owners of land or other forms of wealth, that they don't know how to give to young people. And so we've been in this conversation that can build a meaningful bridge between the broken legacy of the older folks and the broken futures of the young. And we've been doing this through deep land connection. So I have a talk here for you called How Do We Regenerate Cascadia? And part of my background, I have a really strange background, but part of my background is that I was trained in cognitive linguistics and frame semantics. My mentor in that work was someone you may know, a man named George Lakoff, which means I care a lot about language. And so I chose this title intentionally. So I just wanted to walk you through the title as a way of beginning. Notice that it doesn't say, do we regenerate Cascadia? No, it's presuming we've got to do that. We actually have to figure out how to regenerate entire living systems at scales that are currently unimaginable to us. So the question isn't should we, or might we, or will we, but how. The key word there is how. How do we regenerate an entire bioregion? Now the other key word here is regenerate, because regenerate, which comes from the word regeneration, is one of those words that's already being thoroughly co-opted and greenwashed. For example, Bill Gates is the most ardent supporter of regenerative agriculture. You think that's really about regenerating the earth? No, it's greenwashing. And so the word regenerate and regenerative and regeneration is already being co-opted. And we can't avoid that. That happened to sustainability, it happened to environment, it's happened to a lot of precious words. But the beautiful thing about regeneration is if you understand how it works, it doesn't matter if someone greenwashes it, because we'll know what we have to do. You see, regeneration is the process of the dynamic engagements for any living organism to keep being alive. It is the dynamic process, moment by moment, of reproducing the conditions of being alive. So you can have regenerative patterns for the health of an organism, regenerative patterns for the health of an ecosystem, regenerative patterns for the health of a river, or a mountain range, or a coastal estuary. And so if we focus on regeneration, then we're saying we need to restore the health and vitality of the living systems for this place. People can co-opt the word as much as they want. The hard work of restoring life to place is things like, do we want salmon in this river? Do we want old growth forest on this island? And you see, no one can co-opt that away. So we're talking about regeneration. We're talking about restoring the harmony of living systems. And then there's the word Cascadia. Cascadia is a word that goes back at least to the mid-1970s. Its original usage was connected to geology, to describe the mountain ranges of the Cascade Mountain Range and its related watersheds. But then it later was adopted in the 1980s as a term for a political independence and separation movement for people who wanted to leave the United States or leave Canada and form their own nation state or their own coherent way of living as a nation. And that political history is very important, but also, probably more important, is the way that that boundary is defined with a geophysical reality, which is the geophysical reality of all of the watersheds that drain into the Salish Sea, which includes the Fraser River and all of its tributaries, as well as the Columbia River Basin and the 174 rivers that drain into it. It's a massive geography, ranging from southern Alaska to northern California, the west coast inland, to include most of British Columbia, parts of Idaho, and even parts of Wyoming, because the Snake River coming out of Yellowstone drains into the Columbia River. And so Cascadia is a coherent living system of watersheds and mountain ranges and coastal areas. And this geophysical reality does not care about fictitious political borders. It must be managed as a holistic system. So we're going to talk about how do we do regeneration at such a massive scale. Now, in order to do that, we need to start with an observation that has been made by many people before, which is that if you look at the Earth from space, you will notice a complete absence of boundaries. There are no boundaries, there are no lines on the Earth. What you can see here is a holistic, interdependent web of living systems. Just ask yourself, where is there water? You'll see there's water in the ocean, but on land there's water in the rivers and the lakes, but then in the atmosphere there's water in the clouds. And even where there are no clouds, there's water vapor. The better question would be, is there a single pixel in this image that does not have water? And the answer is no, there's water everywhere. Even in the subduction zones, where our ocean seafloors go under the continental plates, they bring water down into the magma of the Earth. and it shoots back into the air in our volcanoes as steam. There's even water inside the Earth. It integrates and connects everything. And this integration creates systemic risk. And systemic risk is the problem we have to deal with. So just by a show of hands, who here has heard of the planetary boundaries? So most of you, most of you. I want to use this as a motivation for why we need to do regeneration at planetary scales. Because this is a framework that answers a very interesting question. It was developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is a collaboration of about 3,500 different scientists who study the dynamic Earth, and they asked a very interesting question. The question was, with everything we know about the Earth, are there any boundaries or thresholds that if we cross it, we leave the stable, warm climate that made it possible to have agriculture, permanent population centers, cities, empires, civilizations, or global trade networks? That if we moved beyond this critical threshold, all of these things could be lost. And so this question was asked in 2009. And then they gathered all the research and they found that there's not one boundary, there are 9. There are 9 boundaries. And if you cross even one, we leave the safe operating range for humanity. So climate change is only one of them. Then there's biosphere integrity, which is the rate of loss of extinctions, the rate of loss of species, which is the mass extinction event that we're in. Then there's land system change, which is the destruction of healthy ecosystems. Then there's freshwater use, geochemical flows, which is reactive nitrogen and phosphorus used in industrial agriculture, that as it runs off into our rivers and into our oceans, causes huge dead zones and threatens to collapse the base of the food supply of the entire planet. Then there's ocean acidification, atmospheric aerosol loading or air pollution, stratospheric ozone depletion, because the ozone layer protects us from ultraviolet radiation. And that ultraviolet radiation, if it reached the surface, would cause there to be no more life on any continent of the planet. And then novel entities, which is any chemical created by humans that the planet doesn't know what to do with. So you see there are 9 of these. And after they identified 9, they said, well, okay, how are we doing? Have we crossed any of them? What's the status? So in 2015, after a bunch of meetings and conferences and published papers, they said, oh, we've crossed 4. We've crossed the planetary boundaries for climate change, the rate of extinction, the destruction of ecosystems, and this reactive nitrogen and phosphorus. But then the research continued, and they got better data and better results. And so in 2021, they added 2 more, freshwater use and ocean acidification. Now, that doesn't mean we crossed the boundary during that time, but just that the research got good enough that they could verify this was the case. And then in 2022, they added novel entities, microplastics. Microplastics are long-lasting, hormone-disrupting chemicals that live in our environment, and they can be found in every drop of breast milk of every woman on Earth and in every water supply of the entire planet. All of our freshwater supplies, our aquifers, even in the clouds above mountains, there are microplastics. They're ubiquitous across the planet now. The lesson to take away from this image is that nothing less than a wholesale reimagining of the human presence on Earth will allow us to get through to the future. This tells us that simply changing our light bulbs or other techno-fix solutions are completely inadequate. We absolutely have to reimagine how humans are part of this planet, or we will go extinct and we will no longer be a part of it. That is what this is telling us. We have driven the planet so far from stability and its ability to regulate itself that the entire biosphere is collapsing around us. And this can be seen, I'm not going to go through all of the information in this graphic. This is a summary of the tipping points of the Earth system, and you can see how this works. You see, those planetary boundaries are to keep us from crossing any of these tipping points. For example, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, which could cause sea level rise. But if that fresh water runs into the North Atlantic too quickly, it causes the ocean circulation in the North Atlantic to shut down. Or the Amazon rainforest, which is being deforested so thoroughly that it's within the next 2 years is going to permanently transition into grassland savanna due to deforestation. The West Antarctic ice sheet that if it falls into the ocean will cause sea level to rise by 4 or 5 meters, inundating half of the human population that lives on coastlines. There's the dieback of the boreal forest, the world's largest forest. Did anyone notice the pattern of wildfires in Canada this year? The boreal forest is beginning to die back. And so what you can see is a set of tipping points in the Earth system, and we're crossing them now. And as we cross one, it makes others more likely. And this is how the interdependencies of the Earth create systemic risk. Or said another way, the Earth is a whole system with cascading relationships across space and time. And there can be long time delays where actions from 30 years ago could cause us to cross a tipping point now. And these breakdowns unfold across space and time. And so I want to focus on the word across, which is that the solution to this cannot be found in any one place, because it's actually affecting multiple places simultaneously. So this leads me to something that I learned by traveling around the world and visiting regenerative projects. I visited lots of regenerative projects, and what I found was every single one of them, without exception, was organized around the boundaries of a plot of land. So you've got this great reforestation project, this riparian restoration on the side of a river. You've got a really good permaculture project, all these beautiful things, but they're always bounded by a plot of land. Unfortunately, every plot of land is embedded within a larger set of ecological connections. For example, you might have a beautiful permaculture project in a watershed, and someone upstream from you can dump chemicals into the water that float across your land. There are ecological connections that are larger than the size of the plot of land. And those ecological connections naturally organize themselves into holistic landscapes. Things like watersheds, coastal estuaries, mountain ranges, regional precipitation patterns like monsoon seasons. There are larger holistic landscapes. And those holistic landscapes are embedded within and affected by planetary processes. When I went looking for the pathway to planetary sustainability, I found that it does not exist at any of these levels. You can't find it in any of them. But if you change your perspective, you can see that there is a pathway that exists by simultaneously working across and between them, which is that you can take multiple regenerative projects, each one on a plot of land, and recognize that they are already ecologically connected through larger landscapes. So you can organize regenerative projects within a watershed, for example. And these larger holistic landscapes already exist. And so if you organize in this way, you begin to work across scales. And that's how we go from local up through nested levels all the way to the planetary scale. And so something that I learned as I was trying to figure out how do we do this, how do we work at these large scales, was I realized something profoundly simple and yet of major significance, which is that everything that happens anywhere on Earth happens somewhere. Now, that's a really simple thing to say. Everything that happens somewhere. But because everything is interdependent and interconnected with everything else on Earth, every somewhere is connected to every other somewhere. So when you look at a map of North America like this, we ask ourselves, so where are we on Earth? And the answer is, we're right there, right? We're in a place. We're in a specific place. Now, it turns out that every place has the capacity for transformational systemic change. So let's look at where we are. Here we are, we're in Victoria, and we look around and there's all this shape and complexity in the landscape around you. There's all this richness of organization in the land already present in the shapes of the land bodies, the waterways, the movements of energy. And if you zoom out, you see there's even more structure, there's even more complexity already around us that we can organize with. So how does this work? It works like this. Every single place on Earth has a unique geologic history like no other place on Earth. Every place has a unique ecological history like no other place on Earth. The kind of life, the kind of ecosystems that can exist in that place. And every place, if humans have existed there, has a unique cultural history, ways of living and finding harmony and being sustainable in place. And as you gather this information, as you reconstruct the geologic, cultural, and ecological history of a place, you discover that there is a story of that place. The story of that place is rich in its nuances. What kinds of tectonic plates, what kinds of soils, what kinds of trees, what kinds of mammals, what kinds of insects. And humans living there, what kinds of economies, what kinds of cosmovisions and worldviews do they have? And you see that the place is already filled with a tremendous richness. And as you put together this story of place, you gain whole system understandings of the place. How does this place work? What kind of life can be found here? And what does it mean to live in harmony with this place? But also, you discover that the story is still unfolding. It's not finished yet. When you arrive in this place, I arrived in Victoria 4 days ago. I entered into the unfolding story of this place. All of us in this room right now are part of the story of this place. Which means as we gain whole system understandings of our place, we can start to collectively imagine regenerative futures for this place. We can reconstruct the history and say, how does holistic life work here? And what do we do to restore it? And then you start to see things like, oh, Bowker Creek is under concrete, but it used to be free-flowing with wetlands and forest. Or you notice this other river used to have salmon, but now it's dammed up and closed. And you start to see that the regenerative capacities are lessened, that there's less regenerative capacity than there used to be. And then you start to see what the pathway is. Restore the patterns of life for your place. So let's look at how this works. This is an image I took from Google Earth. That little area up in the top is Eugene, Oregon. And north is this way. And what you can see is that there are some really clear patterns of degradation for the landscape in this image. So I've got a daughter who's almost 7 years old. She loves to draw with crayons and markers. If I asked her, Elise, where are the degraded places? And she'd go, oh, they're right there. You can see them, right? They are already self-organized into the valleys and watersheds because it's in the floodplains of those valleys where they cut down the forest to establish agriculture. Or in the confluence, in this case, of two rivers, the Mackenzie and the Willamette, to build an urban landscape, which is a degraded ecology. And now you can see that there are natural patterns in the landscape that show you how to regenerate it. Now, if you just look at this one in the middle, that one's maybe about 15 kilometers long by maybe 5 or 6 kilometers across. There may be 100 pieces of private property in that valley, and you start to see that this is a human scale of organizing. It would be possible to go and talk to all the people who live in that valley and explore how to partner and regenerate that valley. And there are all kinds of interesting techniques. Like anyone who does watershed restoration knows, you always start uphill and work your way down. You look for the ecological connections, and where they're broken, you restore them. And you see that this is a scale of organizing that makes sense. And see, there are 3 of them. So we could have 3 different projects to regenerate 3 different valleys. And each of them is a human scale and understandable about how to go about doing it. So we can organize around the natural patterns of landscapes. Now, when we go out to a larger scale, this is the Willamette Valley in western Oregon. Now I've changed directions, and north is that way. So Portland's on the left and Eugene is to the right. And this is about 100 miles, so it's like 160, 170 kilometers north to south. It's maybe 70 or 80 kilometers east to west. And look how degraded it is. It's like thoroughly deforested. How would you ever regenerate something at this scale? But it's the same thing. Where are the most degraded places? I'll color in a few of them for you. Again, it's the valleys and the watersheds. So you start to imagine that maybe there are 40 or 50 of these valleys. Look, you can see those 3 of them next to Eugene. They're in the previous image. And you start to see that with 40 or 50 separate and parallel projects, you could begin to regenerate the Willamette Valley. But now when we go out to something as big as the Columbia River Basin, I mean, this thing's huge. 174 rivers that drain into the Columbia. It's massive. But look, there's the Willamette Valley. And you start to see that you could repeat this pattern across every part of the Columbia Basin and regenerate this massive continental scale hydrological system, all the way up to the Canadian Rockies, right all the way across the Columbia Plateau. And you start to see a pattern of organizing for regeneration at large scales. So when we look at the watersheds that define the boundaries of Cascadia, here in blue is the Columbia Basin, there in yellow is the Fraser, and you start to see the shapes and patterns of watersheds. You see, this is a powerful way to organize local landscapes. In every landscape, you look to the land, it shows you how it's already organized, and you begin to organize around it. And in this way, you can imagine a mycelial web of regeneration spreading across the Cascadia bioregion. So here we are on this trip where we're having conversations about regeneration in multiple places. And so let's say we visited all of those places, and in each one of them, people start organizing around their landscapes and organizing to regenerate their own areas while collaborating with other landscapes. And that's so inspiring. People down here on the Snake River, they start getting excited and they do it too. And you begin to see a pattern language, which is that there are multiple nested levels of reality. And locally, they organize into the shapes and contours of our land. And then we can organize ourselves around land in this way. And if we do this in a collaborative way, we can spread across something as large as the Cascadia bioregion. So I want to briefly go through some of the structures of bioregional regeneration to give you a feel for how this can be done in practice. Because what we just talked about is how land can organize us as humans, but how do we organize ourselves? How do we organize human cooperation in order to do this kind of work? And so, again, we organize ourselves by the land. We organize around the shapes of landscapes. And then we start to think about creating bioregional learning centers. A bioregional learning center is a gathering place for all of that knowledge to construct the story of place. How do you learn about this place? What are the native plants? The indigenous people here. How did they live when they were here? What did they do? What were their relationships to specific plants? What kind of food did they eat? What did they use to make their clothing? What did they use to construct their houses? And you start to see that the story of this place can be learned by having bioregional learning centers. And then you need to create territorial governance because you have to have ways of setting priorities, making decisions, mobilizing resources, and having the sovereignty locally to manage these processes as they unfold over long periods of time. And the way that we create these is by identifying local regenerative projects and weaving them into tapestries organized as landscapes. And we gather together the knowledge about the different kinds of learning about how to live in this place that already exist and create ecosystems of learning so that people who live here can learn how to live in this place. And as you do this, you realize that this is going to require a lot of cooperation. So we have to intentionally design pro-social contexts. What do I mean by that? I mean you have to have shared identity and purpose. For example, do we want salmon in this river? That's a shared purpose. And those who want that have a shared identity. And as you create shared identity and purpose, you need equitable contribution of benefits and effort so that people feel it's fair and they want to participate. You need fast and fair conflict resolution. You need fair and inclusive decision making. If there are multiple groups involved, you need collaborative relations between those groups. These are all aspects of being pro-social, of being able to be cooperative and generous and act based in trust and work towards shared goals. So we have to design our context to be pro-social, organized around landscapes. So I just want to briefly be sure we all have a similar understanding of what is a bioregion, because I've been using this word, but I haven't defined it. So bioregion is just short for the longer phrase biological region. And some people use biocultural region, but culture is the behavior of social animals, and animals are biological, so all culture is still biological, so it's still biological regions. Just to say, a bioregion is the geographic space, the spatial range in which the entire life system for a population exists, for any organism. So let's take starfish. What is the bioregion for starfish? Well, starfish live in a very specific kind of landscape. It's called the intertidal zone. Intertidal zone is along a coastline between the high tide and the low tide, and the starfish find all of their food, they find shelter, they find mates, they can reproduce. The entire population of starfish live within the intertidal zone, which is a geographic range that provides the whole life context for starfish. Well, it turns out every organism has a bioregion. There are bioregions for bees, for oak trees, for any kind of organism you can imagine, which means there's also a bioregion for humans. But for humans, it's a little more complicated because the geographic range might depend on worldview, on model of political organization, on the type of economy, on the technology available, which means the cultural dimension of human bioregions can vary, which means it's actually difficult to define in practice where the bioregion ends and where another one begins, because it's a political discourse. The people of the place need to create their shared identity of that place and connect it to the ecological realities of that place, which means human bioregions are beautifully complex. And so if a bioregion is the entire context of a life system for an entire population, that means every bioregion is its own model for regeneration, which is what would be the conceptual model for how to regenerate an entire population. It would be the whole life context. So by definition, the only scale at which humans can become sustainable is the scale of a bioregion. And so this means that we can start to imagine reorganizing the human presence as part of the Earth into a planetary network of bioregions and create learning exchanges between those bioregions to speed up the process. And that's what we're doing, is creating a planetary network of bioregions. This work is underway right now. So what needs to happen is this. We need to recreate the conditions for living locally in terms of material flows, integrated life systems, which means humans with the rest of life. And we need to have thriving families and communities for every place on Earth. Now this map here is something that inspires me a great deal, because this is a map that shows different kinds of ecozones, ecological types, based on the type of soil, the type of climate, types of ecosystems that are there. For our purposes, it doesn't matter what each color represents. Just notice that there are many different colors. There are many different kinds of ecosystems, which means we should expect different kinds of human cultures and different kinds of human economies that are well adapted to each of these places. There'd be a different kind of economy in a dryland that's semi-desert than there would be in lush rainforest. And we would expect those systems to be different. This tells us we should expect cultural diversity for the human presence as part of the Earth. Which brings me to one of those discoveries that sort of shocked me. So some of you may remember, some of you may be old enough to remember, a very controversial report that came out in 1972, the very first computer simulation of the global economy. It was run by a group of computer scientists at MIT, and it was called The Limits to Growth. The Limits to Growth study created a scenario of the future that they called business as usual, which is where that phrase comes from, was the Limits to Growth study. And business as usual, which was not meant to be a forecast, has tracked reality with frightening accuracy all the way up to the present. And it shows the human population begins to slow down in its exponential growth starting around 2030, reaches its peak around 2040, and then very quickly drops. And the human population crashes in the middle of this century. So the fact that we're tracking that reality right now is pretty disturbing. And you can see that a study that showed this kind of an outcome created a lot of controversy. So a group of scholars and researchers gathered together at a place in Hungary called Lake Balaton. So they called themselves the Balaton Group. And for about 10 years, the best thinkers in sustainability in the world had discussions, how do we live within planetary limits? And at the end of those 10 years, there was a very obscure essay written by the lead author of Limits to Growth, Donella Meadows. She just called it A Brief History of the Balaton Group. And that essay was sort of lost to history, and it's resurfaced in the last few years. This is a quote from that essay, where Vernon Rutten, who's a member of the Balaton Group, says this: "Each agroeconomic region is so unique that the concept of transfer of technology is irrelevant. What's relevant is the transfer of the capacity to develop technology and institutions that are consistent with the cultural endowment and resource endowment of each place. We need to create local economies and local governing appropriate to each place. We need to create local living economies." And then Dana Meadows went on to say this: "Out of these 10 years of meetings came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion." So this was an essay written in 1983, 40 years ago. I was 6 years old when this essay was written. So in 1983, the best sustainability thinkers in the world said the only way to get to planetary sustainability is to reorganize ourselves as local living economies, organize as bioregions, and create bioregional learning centers in each of them. That was 1983. That was before the environmental discourse became technocratic, reductionistic. It started to exclude things like human consumption and human population and other key issues that were major parts of the environmental discourse in the middle and later parts of the last century. So my question for you is this: in the 40 years since this essay was written, has anyone come up with a better way to get to planetary sustainability? And the answer is no. No. This is the only way. The only way to become sustainable at a planetary scale is to become sustainable at a regional scale, which is to have regenerative economies organized as bioregions, and those bioregions to have bioregional learning about how to live in that place to perpetuate the culture across generations. This is the only way. So this is the work that we're doing now, is we are stepping into how do we live as regenerative bioregions organized across the planet. And it just happens that Cascadia is the best known, oldest, most mature, and most established bioregion on Earth. So, let's talk about bioregional learning centers really quickly. Bioregional learning centers are a different kind of learning institution. They don't necessarily create new learning, they create coordination of learning processes that already exist. The Bioregional Learning Center goes out into the community, figures out all the ways we learn about this place, and bring it together. As they bring it together, they begin to do mapping and knowledge sharing. How do you connect the different ways of learning about this place with each other and make it available to everyone in the community that lives in this place? This means a Bioregional Learning Center becomes a gateway into the community. So like, all right, I want to do regenerative work. I'm really interested in watershed restoration. Oh, you should go talk to this group. I'm really interested in trauma healing and how to create peaceful relationships after something terrible has happened in the community. Oh, you should go work with that group over there. So the Bioregional Learning Center becomes a gateway into regenerative processes. This is true for outsiders coming into the community, but it's also true for members of the community to say, well, I want to get involved in the regenerative work. I'm going to go to the Bioregional Learning Center and I'm going to learn where these different activities are happening. This includes advanced modeling and simulation. For example, where is the tsunami risk for the next big earthquake? It's really helpful to have advanced computational research centers, data gathering and modeling, scientific visualization, like we have at universities. So this advanced modeling and simulation becomes part of bioregional learning. So the Bioregional Learning Center would coordinate that kind of knowledge. But alongside this advanced scientific research, we need indigenous perspectives, wisdom traditions, and decolonization of education. And a bioregional learning center can bring these things together. So as I have talked with indigenous leaders around the world, the ones who really understand the state of the world, they recognize that we need the best of their wisdom traditions, and we need the best of science and technology. And we have to bring them into ethical alliance with each other. Notice that bioregional learning centers are both centralized in the gathering of knowledge and coordination between activities, and decentralized to allow for the autonomy of those different educational processes. So this is what a bioregional learning center is, but how does territorial governance work? Well, it works like this. You start to ask, what are the regenerative projects in our region? And you begin to map those projects and weave them together. Now, why is this related to governance? Well, who knows about those projects? The leaders of those projects, the people who are managing them. So simply by bringing those people together and bringing the projects into a convening and a facilitated process, the leaders of those projects begin to identify shared needs and priorities that work across the projects, which is a form of creating governance. This allows them to form landscape partnerships, multi-stakeholder groups that work within their communities, so they can guide themselves toward the outcomes that they need to be at the project level and at the larger landscape level. Which implies very strongly that they must create their own community funding structures. They actually need to be able to mobilize and allocate resources in service to the priorities that they set together. This enables them to mobilize resources in service to the whole landscape, instead of this breakdown of competition between projects for scarce resources. This is how local projects and local leaders cultivate sovereignty, because they organize the capacities to mobilize resources, set priorities, and move toward their goals. And this strengthens collaboration internally and creates strong political and economic identity. So this is a process of creating territorial governance through bioregional regeneration. This leads to the idea of a bioregional investment platform, which is that you can take projects that exist within a watershed or some other landscape, organize them into a portfolio, and mobilize resources among them. So just so you can start to see, there are ways of creating larger funding structures and mobilizing larger resources into a bioregion. Something we talked about today in some of the meetings we were in with the Chamber of Commerce, with some mayors in different municipalities. How do we mobilize these resources into the community here? And so you can see bioregional learning centers can come together with territorial governance. And as you start to organize this, you create integrated landscape management. You basically manage things together at this holistic scale, which creates value flows and exchanges between them. Or said another way, you weave the people in projects who are working to regenerate things in your landscape. This grows their ability to cooperate with each other, which deepens their organizing capacities. And in this way, you birth a regenerative economy. So this is a pathway to create the different economic models that we all know that we need. We actually birth them from within our own regenerative processes. So when you look at something like the Salish Sea and you're like, maybe we could do that for every one of these watersheds, right? Every one of these watersheds, we could do this. We could map out projects, create coordination between them, help them to mobilize resources in service to their goals. And you could do this for every watershed in the Salish Sea. But what's interesting is if you look at the pattern of those watersheds and then look at the pattern of language families of First Nations people, language families are the traces of long-standing economic and cultural exchange. And notice that the language families roughly correspond, they don't correspond exactly, but they roughly correspond with watersheds. That's not an accident, because indigenous peoples were already organized as regenerative economies and already organized as bioregional exchange networks. We're rediscovering an old model. Those of us who are not part of indigenous cultures are discovering it, but those of us who are indigenous, oh wait, every human on Earth is descended from indigenous people. Insert Biology 101. This is the first time that any indigenous group or non-indigenous group has had to organize at a planetary scale. This is new territory. No one has done this before. Because of what we said at the beginning with the planetary boundaries, we have to regenerate at a planetary scale, which shows the logic of our Regenerate Cascadia tour. In 30 days, visiting all these different communities, having the same conversation. You can see you guys down here in Victoria. We're about to go on to Gabriola. And in every one of these places, there are local organizing teams who hosted events, and we are convening all of them together in a bioregional summit, November 3rd through 12th, and we're beginning to mobilize the patterning of creating regenerative economies across the Cascadia bioregion. So in these 30 days, we're activating a process that we think will take 200 to 500 years, the timeframes that are needed to do this work. If you want mature forests here, you need about 3,000 years. So we just want to get going in the right direction. So back in February, we did an activation tour in the Great Lakes, where we went through southern Ontario, upstate New York, and northeastern Ohio, and we started a conversation about regenerating the Great Lakes. That process is now underway. They're going to have a summit in February, and it continues as we speak. In May and June, we went from the headwaters of the Colorado River in the Colorado Rockies all the way to the Sea of Cortez in Mexicali, Mexico, planting the seeds of what it would take to regenerate the Colorado. And about a month and a half ago, we had a landscape leaders retreat from all of the communities that invited us to meet with them just a few months earlier. They're organizing themselves around bioregional learning strategies and the regeneration of the Colorado River. And then here we are in Cascadia. You starting to see it? This is how you regenerate a continent. So we have conversations starting to bubble in the big one, the Mississippi Basin. People are talking to us in the Ogallala Aquifer, in the Great Plains, in the Driftless region, in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and other parts of this region, and we can see that this is the way that we regenerate continents. So we are working to create bioregional networks across the whole planet. This is the work that we're doing. We created a design school for it, the Design School for Regenerating Earth, which is what these bioregional activation tours come from, is how do we create learning exchanges between landscapes and between bioregions as we grow a bioregional network across the planet. I've got a book about it. You don't even have to read the book because right now, by being in this room, you are inside the pages of this book. The book is called The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, and we're living it out right now. Regenerate Cascadia is drawing a spotlight to the most important bioregion for showing others how it can be done. And that's why we're here. So Claire and Brandon, who started Regenerate Cascadia, started this conversation about inviting my partner Penny, who's sitting up there, and Stephen, who's doing the filming. We got some other friends like Quinn and Sean, who have been with us since Portland, as we're gathering people. People like Darren up there in the back, creating digital support tools for saving old-growth forests. We're just accumulating people as we learn how to regenerate the Cascadia bioregion, which, by the way, no one's ever done this before. So we've all got to figure out how to do it. So the conversation we want to have with all of you and with the panel that we're about to join is how do we regenerate Cascadia for real? Because it's kind of now or never. We've got to get on the ball with this. And what we've seen in the last few days is there are some amazing organizing structures. So if you're not familiar with it, Bob, who's on the panel, might talk about the Saanich Peninsula Bioregional Framework. We visited the Friends of Bowker Creek and saw they're organizing around that watershed. And there are plenty of other things like this that are in your community right now, already living this story out. And so, really excited to have a conversation with the panelists and with all of you about how we regenerate Cascadia. Thank you.
Discussion to reflect on over to you folks to engage in questions.
So we have the one microphone, and we'll pass it along the panel. Joe will also be here. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We recognise many people in the audience.
This is some story, isn't it? We were in this room in 2015, actually, when we started the Model Planning World with Cora, etc. As you know, one of the cities in this region joined 4 other cities to create a One Planet conversation, which is continuing. You see that resonates to this. Now we're part of tonight's discussion as well. I have some panelists to introduce. Some of you will know them, but just to make sure we're clear on everyone, you may not know them, what the talent is we have at this table. These are people who have dedicated significant amounts of their time, professional, private interest into what we would call bioregional sustainability. Cora Hall, that's the lady in the middle. Cora is now principal of her consulting practice, part-time manager of
Ecocities initiatives for the BCIT Centre of
Ecocities, and is a senior associate with One Earth. She has over 20 years' experience advancing community and organizational sustainability. She has served on numerous boards and advisory groups, including most recently the Capital Regional District Roundtable on the Environment. Cora leads 3 progressive sustainability initiatives currently: the Greater Victoria 2030 District, which is engaged leading property managers in creating a hub of high-performance buildings; One Planet Sandwich, which engages businesses, community organizations, and schools in developing One Planet Living sustainability action plans. And I know several people in the audience here are deeply engaged in those processes. The EcoCity Peer Network, which is helping BC local governments all over the province understand and act on their consumption-based emissions and ecological footprints. Sitting on the far side to Cora's right is Lorenzo Maxwell. Lorenzo is a member of the Chuchuel Maya Nation. Did I get that correct? Close enough? Yeah, from Guatemala. So we have an international panel. His PhD is on climate adaptation and indigenous resilience in Canada and Guatemala. Currently, he is working with the Community Social Planning Council on a new climate equity program for local community. Bob Bird sat next to Joe on his right. Bob is a biologist and educator living in Victoria. He has specialized in the fields of parks management, land use planning, and environmental education for nearly 40 years, with government and non-profit sector and as a self-employed consultant. Previously, Bob has worked for the Sierra Club BC, Parks Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service, the BC Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs, the BC Outdoor Recreation Council, the Royal BC Museum, and the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society BC chapter, as well as working on the political side of government through the 1990s. Among other things, he founded the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada, was the elected chair of the Nature Canada Board of Directors, and as well as being involved with a number of community-level NGOs. Currently, he coordinates the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, which has created a bioregional framework, which has been adopted by all 3 municipalities on the Saanich Peninsula, and we were taking that on a tour earlier today where we went out and met the West Shore Mayors as a way of embracing bioregional concepts into the official community plan and strategic plans of the 13 municipalities in the region. So Bob was quite a pioneer in that. So that's the panel, ladies and gentlemen. I have some questions that came to mind from talking with others, my own thoughts. But first of all, before we go to the panel, we are tight on time, so I count at 9. Is that a strict 9, Trevor? Or is that a soft 9? It's a soft 9, depending on the audience. But first of all, off the top, going with Bob, Cora, and then Lorenzo, your first thoughts, let's get 2 minutes each. What are your first thoughts on what you've heard today and how that impacts your own thoughts of what we're doing in the region? Put my time up.
Yeah, it's very positive. You know, what I like is the organization at the geographic level. It's very positive. people a sense of hope in this crazy, mixed up world. There's a sense of the future, and I think that having something out there that's proactive, that isn't reactive, that people can work with, is really good. It's kind of a social and a political collaboration, which is, I think, is really important in today's world. From my experience in the Sandwich Peninsula, is the conversation we're having is the community really appreciates the conversation. It's bringing a collaborative together that didn't exist before. It's a manageable scale for the conversation. And I think what the government really needs to be a participation in the conversation, because as someone was saying earlier, this is switching light bulbs, this is changing the conversation. And that's really, really been positive. So that's kind of my reaction to it.
Thank you, Bob. Congressman Corora, please.
Well, thanks, Joe, for the presentation. That was really resonated with me on a lot of levels, and I think that I've got a couple of notes here, make sure I catch everything. So I think it's really hard hearing some of the things that you mentioned at the beginning, but I think it's really important for people to hear that. We have climate change right now. Everyone that's in our face, I think people are starting to really understand and see that. But not many people don't realize that that's just a symptom of a greater problem. And I think Joe's presentation really hit home on that. So really important to share that message. And in the work that I do, what we focus on is ensuring that everyone can live well within the balance of nature, within the limits of our planet. And so that's really where we need to get to. And the solutions that Joe is presenting really talks to that. Our key challenge is really about consumption, the level of consumption that we all have. And so whatever we do, we have to figure out how to bring down the level of consumption of all of us. Most of us here are over consumers, while there's others around the world that don't have enough. So we need to bring up their consumption and reduce our consumption so we can live in balance with nature. Another key piece that I really think is important is connections. So a key challenge for us across the world is a loss of connections that we all have. So loss of connection with nature and that understanding that we need balance with nature, but also loss of connection with people. And so what Joe was talking about is helping us connect to both of those things, which are really critical if we're going to be successful. And that's something I try and do in my work as well. I had another slide. Another key thing is people do want to do the right thing. People need more information though too. So with One Planet Saanich, there's a few people involved in One Planet Saanich here. And one thing I hear from them is they didn't have access to a network to find information of where do I need to focus my efforts, what can I do? And at an individual level, that's the case too. People need more access to information. So I think this connecting people, connecting them to the knowledge and information is really important. I've talked too long, so I'm going to pass it over.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm glad to see so many people in the audience. It's wonderful to see that level of interest and hopefully optimism towards a better future for us and for the planet. I'm from Guatemala originally. I'm an indigenous person. As was mentioned, I am a Mayan person from a language called Cascadia. I was born and raised in Guatemala in an agricultural community. And so to me, what Joe was talking about really resonates in the sense of having born in a place where we all knew where we came from, we all knew what we needed to survive. So that connection with the land was there. It's still there for many people in that community. We all have the understanding of intimate connection with the land, so there are legends, there are stories that continue to make us regenerate that connection with the land. So God's land and the maintenance of that land in its whole is holistic component is vital for our survival. bioregionalism, as Joe mentioned, is something that was there before, and it's good to acknowledge that this is something that we can just maybe not regenerate, but rather, of course, some of us, as we to protect those kinds of concepts, those kinds of ways of being and living have already been there. And in some way, in most cases, I'd say, for indigenous peoples especially, were just completely disrupted when colonial powers came into our territories and degenerated, destroyed those connections that we had in the land. So, in many cases, it's just protecting, and of course, where it's been destroyed, to regenerate, but to continue to live and reconnect and take into account that we're all interdependent, just like most indigenous people do think of the land, of the planet, as we live in it. I guess the other thing I was going to say is that, for me, obviously, the concept of bioregionalism is so important, but on the other hand, given that I come from a community that was marginalized and there's so many barriers and challenges for people to survive, that is one of my main issues. My main concern is the equity in while we're regenerating the bioregions, how are we all participating or not participating in that regeneration? Are we all able to participate? Are we all having the same chances to be a part of that regeneration? My work with the Community Social Planning Council is about climate equity, which means that we're all being affected by climate change, but not everyone's being affected equally. We all need to be part of, if we're addressing climate, be a part of that solution from an equal footing. We all need to be part of the solution, but also to be benefited in the same way.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions here. And the first one, I'll ask two questions, then we'll come to the audience. I'll keep my questions fairly brief. And then brief answers coming through the panel, so we've got time for more meaningful those conversations. Unless you're a vegetarian, which will count some please. So today we've heard about the idea of a bioregional summit as an action item. We've heard about Regenerate Cascadia as an immense plan and action item that will take decades to do, but it's actually built on decades of work here and other areas, and many in this room, the panel have been involved for decades. Patrick Lucy is there, is one of our top watershed aquatic experts, etc. We had time with him today. We had time with the Chamber of Commerce. We had time with the Tourism Victoria. We had time with mayors. And everybody was saying, that's interesting, tell us more, what can we do? So one of the things we think we can do is lead towards the Bioregional Summit, which will talk about Regenerate Cascadia. It's part of the participatory futures project that Trevor was talking about in terms of the One Planning Understanding. This might lead to a bioregional learning centre. So to the panel, what steps do you think you would like to see and in place for moving towards activation of a bioregional summit sometime early in the new year? We'll go to Rob first.
The idea of the bioregional summit. So in 2018, there was the Sydney Summit. And the Sydney Summit was a collective conversation of people who lived on the Sandwich Peninsula. And the conversation was about working together in an integrated manner. To make a long story short, what that led to was a collaborative with the Sandwich Peninsula Environmental Coalition, and we've developed a bioregional framework for the Sandwich Peninsula, and some of the people who helped me are in the back of the room there. And so it's great, you have a bioregional framework and you've got some principles, but so what? So then we spent time building that into the official community plans. And in Sydney and Central Sandwich have embedded a number of the principles in their official community plans, and we're working to do a similar thing with North Sandwich. And then you say, well, so what? They're embedded in the plans, what's that really mean? So then we're setting up process of measuring progress on that leading up to the municipal election in the fall of '26. In moving us to said, you get whatever, Sydney or whatever, and just kind of give them in a friendly, kind of respectful way a sense that the public knows that we're trying to follow through on these conversations. And it's really led to a collaborative conversation, and it's really brought a lot of the groups together in the Sandwich Place in a positive way.
From what is being started in the peninsula, that's a great starting point. And I think speaking to what Joe brought up, bringing in the youth as well, and we've got a couple of teachers in the back at least, Mark and Joanna. Yeah, if there's a way to bring the youth into the conversation if they're not already, I think that would be really valuable to build that in as well.
I guess for me, I was just again that for me the idea is that we hopefully all can be a part of all of this, not just those who can have more time, who can afford to take time off. So for me, vulnerable populations, those populations who often are not able to participate because they're not means, those are the ones who we should be reaching out to and being part of this conversation.
So what we've heard a little bit here is, and that's interesting to tell us more, but also some of this work has already been underway in smaller scale. This will be a much larger scale. All the municipalities south of Malahat, all the groups south of Malahat, is about 450,000 people. And we had a take-up with that, on that idea, with the people who were in the meeting. I want to give a call out to Claremont and Mark Neufeld at the back there, who hosted Joe to talk to the students. Very positive response from the students, very willing to be engaged. Over the weekend, there was a meeting with faith groups, very willing, and many of the faith groups and the school groups are embedded into the One Planet movement. The One Planet movement looks at reducing 4 planets to 1 planet consumption, and Cora was onto that. It's a massive idea, and sometimes it's a bit daunting to people. And what we found is that people work locally. You saw the idea of a plot of land. So what I'd like to ask the panel now, could you reflect on the intersection as we weave between the ideas of a global movement to go to a 1 planet consumption and the progress of a bioregional initiative, such as Regenerate Cascadia? How are they going to support each other? How does it help activate people? I'll come back to Bob.
Well, the thought that comes to mind is kind of the role and importance of nature. And I think I have nature in the city. And we've got involved in another project called Naturehood. Nature in your hood, nature in your backyard. And I think using the whole idea of nature is a way of integrating these conversations. And I think the one thing that's often not thought of, and the connection the office has made, is that human health is directly connected to ecosystem health. You know, that back and forth is really, really important. And as the ecosystem starts to get threatened, well, then, as Joe was saying, that threatens us. But I think nature has got a really, really important role here, and the whole idea of getting outside, and there's huge literature on the physical, mental, and social value of being outside. So my gut reaction is the conversations around nature.
And I guess in order to connect the local with the global, it's also what I was talking about with consumption, looking at consumption too. So our consumption is impacting everyone around the world, all communities around the world. Most of the things we're consuming within our borders are imported from elsewhere. And so from a consumption-based emissions perspective or ecological footprint, all the impact of those things are happening elsewhere. So that is the connection with the global. Like we have to be more responsible with our consumption, and bringing in more local production is a great way to go to reduce. There will be trade, but having more sustainable local production sources is a really good way to go, and also keeping in mind our consumption impacts around the world too.
to add to that, about living, I guess, more regionally or more locally, I see that it's a huge challenge, obviously, given our modern world. A lot of the consumption resources that we need to live the way we live these days are actually come from various places around the world, and sometimes that's the most difficult thing, I think, to address. For example, extractive industries are having a huge impact on faraway places. In the case of Latin America, in the case of my community, there are lots of mining companies from Canada that are extracting minerals there. Lots of oil companies extracting oil from various places around the world, and even agricultural products that are also being extracted and consumed here in the north. And so I think that's a very difficult question to address, but I think we have to be mindful that reducing our consumption is one way of addressing that, but also I think we need to, if we're going to be extracting resources from places, to be just, to be fair about how we compensate people there, to be mindful of the consequences of local economies, local people, their livelihood, and the way they're connecting or being disconnected from the land because of our consumption.
And I guess I just wanted to add on a positive note too. I think a really good connector, I think we all know, is food. And I think there's really good seeds for that here locally. We have a lot of really good regenerative agriculture going on here, and there's just so much production capacity. We can feed ourselves in the region, so that is a really great starting point. And we have Sam Down, regenerative agriculture, Halliburton Farms, lots of great opportunities to build from in the region, and it connects people.
Thank you. So as I listen to that, what I'm hearing is, if we go down this journey of acting locally, regenerate our water systems, regenerate our food scales locally, and do Regenerate Cascadia, that is addressing what I'm trying to do. That is addressing the consumption. It is addressing mental health and the future of mankind. So acting locally, but also acting planetary. I think that's the theme underlying what you've already shown here is the latest slides. So I'd like to stop my questions there, and I'll Joe's hand came up. And I'm now going to come to the audience. Are there any particular questions you find to anyone? We do have Joe here. Yes, please.
Thank you for that. It's been an incredible evening. My first introduction to anything like this had nothing to do with Cascadia. It had to do with Kate Raworth and economics acting in that. So I'm finding great similarities there. I just wonder what your connections with them are, because you're talking the same talk.
Thank you for that generous comment. Do you have a question of any kind? Don't give me there's no penalty. Yeah, so thank you. So the connection between the economic issues you've been looking at.
The particular format of economics and the work that they're doing in the economics action of that.
Thank you. Economics. Anybody else have a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I could respond to it briefly to say that, first, I know Kate Raworth personally, she's a friend. And she is not yet at the grieving stage of accepting planetary collapse. You could see it if you watched a Doomer Optimism podcast interview that I was in with her, Daniel Christian Ball, and one other person. Nora. And yeah, Nora Bateson, thank you. All of whom are friends of mine. At the same time, I would say that there are actually more and more people who are coming to recognize the need for this bioregional scale perspective. And what's happening, and it's really unfolding beautifully, is the leaders who are weaving the alliances are seeking coherence. We're looking for ways to build coherence across our movements. So I happen to be someone who's connected with leaders in almost all levels and parts of this movement, so I get to play my own role in that. But people like Kate Raworth also are trying to do this. So what we're going to start to see soon is coherent patterns of partnership between the efforts, But the only way that that makes sense is if we organize our local bioregions. Because if we're organizing locally, then we will bring coherence to those frameworks within our own landscapes. So it goes both ways. Leaders who are bringing these ideas need to be coherent, but more important than that is locally, we need to coherently organize around our own life systems and then share that knowledge with each other.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that presentation. I came here essentially looking for rejuvenation and actually, two questions, really quick. I have a 17-month-old daughter, and so I'm curious how you approach with your daughter the current state of affairs and how you have that conversation with her, because I'm aware that I'm going to have to in the near future. And second question, and this is pointed because I know that there are a few people or even positions of power in this room that have the opportunity to hopefully push this forward, but I will frame it as a question. Why does every student in this institution not leave with a basic understanding of this because it affects their future, and yet how many actually do?
Yeah. I'm happy to take that one.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So, Mark, what was it like when I told your 11th and 12th graders not to go to college? Anyway, we'll let that one sit. I know that I'm being controversial in this moment, but actually we need a different education paradigm for everyone. So, but all of our educators are implicated in the positive sense that all of us can do something about it. I wanted to answer the question about my daughter, because I was really damn depressed for a long time, looking into the darkness of the future, and I still chose to bring a child into the world. So I'm fully responsible, eyes wide open, planetary collapse, acceptance, then have a child. My daughter's almost 7, she's beautiful. Everyone who knows her loves her. So I want to tell you that I moved to Colombia with my now ex-wife, but we're really collaborative in what we do, because we wanted to help bring dead rivers back to life, bring forests back to desert landscapes, and help children grow up. So by the time the children are adults, they're not just saying, oh, we can restore rivers. They're like, we've done it, let's go out and do more. And so the answer that I would give you is, as much as possible, bring your child into direct connection with degraded landscapes. Degraded landscapes that need healing, love, and care from human hands, and teach your child that humans are net positive for the world when we understand how life works. And so we are building patterns of education around our children, where I live in Barichara, Colombia, around the restoration of watersheds, around creating connections between ecological corridors, between creating sustainable food systems, and very importantly, humans always were and always will be a beneficial part of life on this planet. And they're just going to grow up knowing that. And we need our kids to know that. Otherwise, they're not going to survive the crushing depression that's going to come for them when they see how hard the next few decades are going to be. So this is a really big deal. And I would challenge anyone who has grandchildren or young children yourselves to ask, how is our education system preparing them for the future that's coming? And if they don't know how to restore water to land, or how to bring economic patterns of well-being from forest, by the way, forests can grow food, medicine, textiles, natural fibers, and construction materials. If you know how to do it, it's called a food forest. If they don't know how to do that, what are we doing? And so there's a huge role of relationship between indigenous teachers and children to build the conscience and spiritual connection. And there's a big role of permaculture and other kind of ecosystem restoration work to bring directly to our children. And I mean our children. Where I live, the 4-year-olds are leading the policy for how we restore the river, because the 4-year-olds never forgot that there should be fish in the stream. And so there's something really, really powerful about that. But I just want to say it's super important that the kids are restoring landscapes from childhood.
Yes, please.
Yeah, please.
Just a comment I'd like to make is, you often hear the phrase, what kind of earth are we leaving for the children? But I've heard that reframed as, what kind of children are we raising for the future of the earth? And I think that kind of captures what John was getting at there. So
So we're thinking we'll run to about 10 past, depending on the audience. We go a little bit longer, but I did see another question. Oh, I'll come to you next. I did see you both.
Thank you, Joe. So nice to have you, and I'm part of the educational system, so I feel guilty, but at the same time, I have a supervision, I have a vision that supports the UVIC world, and I work as a climate policy professor in the School of Public Administration, training future policymakers and leaders that have to work within the boundaries of current political systems and really want to learn real-life practical solutions. And in my research work, I study people that do international representative surveys of people in all sorts of countries. And just today I received a huge data set that shows that the majority of people in developed and developing countries want economies to grow while reducing emissions. So how do you reconcile everything that's been said on reducing consumption, decreasing economic growth, and giving people tools, realistic tools to change policy?
Oh, thank you for this question. You may not like my answer. The real tools that we need are the management of grief as the human population plummets. And the real tools we need are the recognition that there are about 300 documented civilizations. All 300 of them have collapsed, and this one will too. And 0 of those civilizations had people wake up and stop it. Which means we'll expect most people to not understand what's happening, to be confused and delirious, to have ecological anxiety or existential risk that causes them to become fundamentalist and violent, to select for tyrannical leaders and war, and lots of ugliness. So anyone who wants to create perpetual economic growth can go find another universe that doesn't have any basis in physics. A lot of people really don't understand what's going on. And so the answer is we have to be real. And to get real is to see that we are already 30 years too late to avoid abrupt catastrophic climate change. It's already too late. The ocean is about 40 years behind the atmosphere in absorbing heat. Just let that one sink in. The ocean is water, the atmosphere is air, so we're about to experience much worse things than now from emissions from the last 40 years. And so that's just climate emissions and global warming. So people who think that they're going to participate in the current system, the system that is the most unsustainable, abnormal, and bizarre system in all of human history, are going to be up for quite a shock about reality slamming into their faces. And so that opens up a new doorway, though, which is that we have a better understanding of the planet than we ever have before. We have a better understanding of how to create really regenerative economies than ever before. And so what we need to do is build those in parallel as local experiments all over the planet. And there's a lot of policy considerations that can support that. Just as one example, the basis of capitalism, starting in the 1600s, was the creation of private land in England with the enclosure movement. And that created, for the first time in human history, mass poverty. Can't have mass poverty unless you displace people from land and control access to wealth through land ownership. And so we only have about 400 years of mass inequality and mass poverty. Isn't that interesting? Because that tells you there are policy frameworks for land ownership that can do something very different. And so what we can start to see is in what the consequences are of our policy choices tell us what we can do differently. And so notice that I'm sort of dancing in the paradox now. Because I just said, anyone who thinks we're going to have economic growth as we continue destroying the biosphere, and somehow we're just going to moonshot ourselves to Mars where there's no living capacities, or upload ourselves to silicon and stop being humans. By the way, our billionaires think that's a good idea. They really do. That what we actually need are real understandings of the earth, real understandings of life, and the restoration of something really deep, which is humans are part of the earth. We always have been. And when we go back to that, we'll actually find there are lots of policy frameworks that make sense, but that most of us who understand those things will go into institutions that don't get it, we'll be surrounded by most people who don't get it, we'll gaslight ourselves and think we're crazy, we'll eventually find out it was everyone else who was crazy and not us, except it wasn't everyone, because then we'll find the others like us, and then we'll organize with those people. And that's been the path of most of us in this room, I suspect, is some version of that. And so we can jump ahead with young people by just starting with that deep acknowledgement. And so that's why I find not just the planetary boundaries helpful. It is helpful, but if you don't understand the tipping points and how the Earth system actually works, you're just left paralyzed with fear. But when you understand how the Earth system works, you start to see how did that stability break down. And then you start to see how to work with it. You'll also see the human population is too big, it's going to get smaller, and that really sucks. Why? Why does it suck? Because humans are wired for empathy, and we're going to feel the pain and the loss. Or we're going to numb ourselves out and not feel it, and then we're going to behave like jerks. Either way, that sucks. And so it sucks as an experience. So it's just something we're living through. We're 50 years into ecological overshoot. We've been beyond the carrying capacity of the Earth since about 1975. And most people don't know that. So bringing policy frameworks in that are realistic and that can help us prepare for the future involves really embracing that understanding, and there's grief and trauma work in that. So I would maybe recommend bring in the grief and trauma healers into the policy space. Bring in Joanna Macy and other thinkers who have showed us how to do this, to reconnect with love without closing off our feelings because of the pain. And that's what's going to help us not go into denial. And that's going to help us stay in what's real. And then we can create policy frameworks that work. Gabor is awesome.
So I'll come to that next question. But what we're dealing with through the presentation, the conversation, is a homeostatic mechanism, and as mankind push the planet homeostatic process beyond recovery. But there are some intermediate things that we can do, and Cora's going to talk about a little bit about that. She started the conversation earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, I agree. Thank you for that. Totally, we're in a trajectory of overshoot, but I like to have a little bit more positive. I feel like there could be a way out, and one way out is regeneration. So we're heading on the wrong course. There's still time to make it more habitable in the future. If we don't course correct, this is going to keep getting worse. So I think it's really important to focus on regeneration, reduce our consumption, and very much focus on regeneration. We definitely need a new economic system. What we have is just going to keep causing more problems if we don't change our economic system. And we're seeing seeds of that already. The sharing economy, everything's a bit too, it's not built up enough yet, but we're seeing seeds of that. And people want a positive, a boost of positivity. I just read Ministry for the Future, and it starts really horribly with like massive death and everything, but it has some really great things that happen in there, and it just made me feel better. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Cora. I just wanted to add a couple of things. First, I think for me, despite the fact that obviously I've seen a lot of people suffer from all kinds of challenges from growing up in Guatemala and going back to the States. I live there, but I visit frequently. I know the challenges that a lot of people live through, and I know that we probably will continue if don't change course, as Cora has already said. But on the other hand, I feel that there are so many young people that need our positive guidance for what's going to come in the future. I have one son who's 3 years old, and over the past couple of years, while I'm with him, I feel this need to just have a really positive outlook of the world. And I'm going to disagree with Joe, but when I'm with my grandson, I actually want him to see the beautiful part of the world, the beautiful things that we have still. Like looking at the flowers, the bees, the things that are still around. And I think that's something more positive rather than bringing him to a degraded area. It doesn't quite kind of follow, just my opinion. Secondly, my last thing is that I've been spending a lot of time in my community. One of the last research that I did there was actually looking at how people have been affected by climate change. People have been affected but they're resilient and they find ways to adapt. And that's for me one of the kind of very positive things that I still find. Despite the challenges, people will adapt because we have to.
And we'll be happier with less consumption. Overconsumption causes more stress and all of the stuff. We've got too much.
So how do we share the wealth of the planet? I'll come to you for your question. Do I have your permission to give another few moments for another question? Yeah? Okay. How do we extract but not exploit? How do we share? And these are human traits in society that we can share. We can not exploit. So that gives us cause for optimism, I think, and that's part of the Regenerate Cascadia learning.
Hope is action, and action is hope. So tonight you're doing hope for everyone. And I think that that's really important for all of us to do. But one of the questions I have for you this evening was that Canada last year in Montreal did a 30 by 2030, saving biodiversity, 30% of Canada's biodiversity, the wetlands and everything like that, and joined a lot of other nations to do that. Do you see that fitting into your Regenerate Cascadia? I've let 30% of my garden go this year, and I noticed lots more bees, lots more birds. I still have a few invasive things to take out. But do you see that fitting into your Regenerate Cascadia?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely it does, because what we need to do is remember that humans are not separate from nature. We're not better than nature. That's not even factually true. And that separating ourselves from nature and making the planet only about ourselves makes us lonely, miserable, want to kill ourselves, and really good consumers. All of those are organized with each other. The other thing I want to say in support of this is that the best thing we can do is actually to work with the most powerful force of life on Earth, which is ecological succession. For those of you who know a little ecology, you'll know what I mean. Ecological succession is when an ecosystem goes through its stages of development, and as the ecosystem goes through its stages, it creates niches, and it fills those niches, and the amount of biodiversity grows. And the ecosystem becomes more and more self-stabilizing and resilient. And if all goes well, it achieves what's called climax ecosystem, which is the most mature, resilient, and biodiverse level of ecosystem existence that our planet can create. And just as a little example of this, in the Amazon rainforest, there are these things called cultural forests. It's about 11% of the land area of the Amazon is confirmed to have higher biodiversity and higher biomass because of long-term human management. The humans actually made the forest more biodiverse than it would have been on its own. And the healthiest, most robust soil ever created, ever discovered, goes by the name Terra Preta, and it's a human invention by indigenous people in the Amazon. Which is just to say that by focusing on holding the biodiversity and maintaining it and finding harmony with it rather than having goals that are based on human outcomes, but putting humans back into harmony with the rest of life opens up the space where we can connect and feel this. And so this is a really, really big deal. So that's just my elaborated way of saying yes.
Yeah, 30 by 30. There's also the conversation about nature needs half. And I think that whole context is nature-based solutions and natural assets. And so I think, yes, fundamentally, we have to bring the conservation conversations together with the climate conversations and the nature-based solutions.
So, thank you for your graciousness in giving us the extra 15 minutes. We'll wrap up the evening there because people are leaving and I know we have some time constraints. What an amazing conversation. Let's hear some recognition of the panel.
Trevor will process.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks to all of you for being here and for engaging and listening, and I hope that it's been powerful, it's been challenging, it's been hopeful, and this is just the beginning of the journey, so thank you for being here. We do have a small token for the panel, and what you get is a beautiful card from the First Nations artist, and there we are. And we've made a donation on your behalf to the Victoria Native Friendship Centre. And then for Joe, we have a gift as well, and it's been a quite remarkable 4 days. We've covered a whole range of groups, as has been mentioned, from school to mayors to faith communities, and much more than that. And Joe is indefatigable. We had him here, 5 years ago.
I'm a dancer too.
His first undergrad is in dancing, and he's never really. But then, since I'm a Morris dancer, I embrace that totally. So, what we have for you here is we do have a gift card in here, but also Alan McClash, who was here earlier as on our board and is a volunteer of the Native Friendship Centre, went to the Songhees powwow and found you some suitable gifts, which is there for you. And it's sweetgrass and or sage rather, and a little medicine bag and a shell. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And
Thank you, everyone.
Katja Rhodes from UVIC is going to close it up for us.
A huge round of applause for Trevor Hancock for the Thank you, Joe.
It's not me alone, so it's all the others.
Thank you, Joe, and all the panelists for participating. Thank you for coming over here to UVIC to talk about bioregionalism. I'm here at UVIC teaching young people, and I consider myself a young person too, so I see a lot of hope, and I really do want to emphasize